Yeah, I think stuff to do with family overwhelms me.
To the outside world, Queen Camilla's place at the head of the British monarchy seemed entirely set in stone. But behind the formal portraits and public appearances, a much colder institutional reality was taking shape. Prince William discovered that a private network had been quietly built to keep Camilla's inner circle in power long after the current reign ends. This was never a dramatic family feud about past grievances. It was a swift, calculated effort to protect the authority of the coming crown. In one silent move, William cut off that network entirely, leaving Camilla with her title, but stripped of any real power over the monarchy's future. The mask of unity and the silent fracture. The royal household does not issue press releases when power shifts. It never has. For centuries, the British monarchy has communicated its most consequential decisions, not through bold declarations or emergency press conferences, but through the quiet, systematic alteration of public schedules, through a name missing from a circular, through an empty chair at an internal briefing, through the subtle, almost imperceptible distance that opens up between senior figures when the cameras stop flashing and the palace-heavy doors swing shut. To the outside world, the surface appeared entirely serene. Queen Camilla was still attending ceremonial engagements, smiling beside the king, and carrying out the formal duties expected of a queen consort. The glossy official photographs continued to circulate. The traditional media outlets continued to report on her patronages, her speeches, and her public appearances with the standard narrative of steady, late-in-life dutifulness. But inside the long, high-ceilinged corridors of St. James's Palace and Windsor Castle, a very different reality was taking shape. Experienced royal watchers, the ones who pay attention to the machinery rather than the theater, had begun to notice a shift in the atmosphere. It was a specific kind of stillness, the kind that arrives just before a massive structural change becomes impossible to hide. The change did not begin with a public scandal. It began with a tapering. Over a period of months, Camilla's operational footprint within the royal family began to shrink. It was done with extraordinary care. A scheduled briefing with duchy estate managers quietly reassigned. A senior administrative review was handed over to Prince William's personal household without consultation. A series of private strategy meetings regarding future royal foundations from which the Queen's key advisors were simply omitted. To a casual observer, these details looked like routine adjustments, a senior royal delegating duties as the natural weight of age and public service takes its toll. But to the people who understand how power actually moves inside the Windsor world, these were not routine adjustments. They were the visible signs of a quiet, ruthless, and total structural removal. The narrative that external commentators naturally gravitated toward was predictable. They spoke of fatigue. They spoke of the ongoing strain on the royal family in the wake of recent health crises. They spoke of a natural realignment as the king and queen managed their respective workloads. Every single one of those explanations was wrong. What was actually happening behind those closed doors had nothing to do with personal exhaustion, public duty, or the natural passage of time. It had everything to do with power, authority, and the brutal self-preservation of an institution that does not tolerate competing centers of influence. Prince William had made a move, cold, precise, and entirely devoid of personal sentiment. To understand why this happened, you first need to know how the monarchy actually functions behind its public-facing image. The British royal family is often discussed as though it were a traditional family unit, a complex, multi-generational household navigating personal relationships, long-standing emotional grievances, and historical tensions under intense public scrutiny. That is the public narrative. It is the story that sells magazines and populates television documentaries. But inside the institution itself, that narrative is viewed as a convenient fiction. The monarchy is not a family business. It is a 1,000-year-old state machine. Its primary directive is not harmony, affection, or emotional fairness. Its primary directive is continuity. It operates on a cold, strategic calculation that prioritizes the stability and authority of the reigning monarch and the immediate line of succession, above the feelings, preferences, or legacy of any individual who passes through its doors. Individuals are temporary. The crown is permanent. When someone enters the royal orbit from the outside, they are expected to adapt to that reality. They are expected to serve the central axis of power, build their public role within carefully defined parameters, and ultimately accept that their influence has a strict, non-negotiable shelf life tied entirely to the monarch they serve. For nearly 2 decades, Camilla had navigated that environment with remarkable tactical discipline. She had survived the most intense public hostility in modern royal history. She had rebuilt her public standing piece by piece, demonstrating a quiet, patient endurance that eventually earned her the title of Queen Consort. She understood the rules of the institution. She understood how to build networks of support among senior courtiers, aristocrats, and media figures without making her moves obvious. She had played a long, disciplined game, and for a long time, that game had succeeded. But there is a fundamental rule inside the Windsor world that every senior figure eventually encounters. Your network is only tolerated as long as it serves the long-term future of the crown. The moment that network begins to construct a shadow authority, the moment it attempts to secure power, estate access, and administrative influence that extends beyond its allotted tenure, it becomes a structural threat. And when Prince William discovered that such a structure had been quietly assembled, the reaction was not a debate. It was an execution. The fracture inside the household did not manifest as a dramatic shouting match across a drawing room. That is not how the palace operates. Confrontation inside these walls is executed through memo, through legal instruction, and through the cold, procedural revoking of access. When William took action, he did not seek the counsel of external advisors or set up internal reconciliation committees. He did not issue warnings. He presented a complete, unassailable set of institutional facts that left no room for negotiation, spin, or back-channel mitigation. The silence that followed inside palace circles was deafening. Senior staff who had built their entire careers around proximity to the Queen's office suddenly found their access credentials restricted, their administrative channels rerouted, and their strategic influence erased overnight. The message sent throughout the entire establishment was impossible to misread. The current reign was ongoing, but the future had already taken absolute control of the machinery. The outside world remains largely blind to the magnitude of what has occurred. The media continues to cover the external engagements, the ceremonial appearances, and the formal photographs. The public sees the crown, the robes, and the smiles. But behind that carefully maintained mask of unity, the real story has already reached its conclusion. Camilla remains Queen Consort on paper. She holds the title. She wears the jewelry. She stands on the balcony. But inside the true machinery of state, where decisions about the future of royal estates, private archives, institutional funding, and long-term authority are actually made, her presence has been systematically stripped away. She has been left with all the visibility of her office, but none of its power. The real reason for this ruthless internal purge is not what the tabloids have spent years speculating about. It was not driven by old family grudges, the memory of Princess Diana, or simple personal dislike. Those are human emotions, and the crown does not make moves of this magnitude based on human emotion. The real reason is far colder, far more strategic, and far more shocking to those who believed the modern monarchy had become soft. It was a move born out of raw institutional self-preservation, a preemptive strike to ensure that when William ascends the throne, he inherits a crown that answers to no one else's legacy. The catalyst, the hidden asset clause. Every major shift in royal power begins with a single, unscripted discovery. It is rarely a public scandal or an explosive argument that forces the hand of the crown. Rather, it is a quiet, administrative revelation hidden deep within legal boilerplate where no one was ever expected to look. For Prince William, the catalyst that turned background tension into absolute strategy was the discovery of a specific provision buried within internal royal trust updates. A mechanism that would come to be known inside his private office as the hidden asset clause. The routine audit of royal trusts and private estate holdings is normally an unglamorous procedural event. Managed by senior legal counsels and financial advisors, these periodic reviews are designed to ensure seamless compliance, clear estate boundaries, and a smooth transition of private wealth between generations. But during a comprehensive review initiated by William's strategy team, aimed at auditing long-term crown allocations ahead of the next reign, an anomaly was flagged. Nested within a complex draft agreement governing the future distribution of non-crown physical assets was a series of quietly inserted legal stipulations. On the surface, the text was drafted in the dense, protective language of traditional royal estate planning, but when stripped of its legalese, the clause established an extraordinary, unprecedented mechanism. It stipulated that, upon the conclusion of the current reign, a curated collection of high-value historic assets, private estate deeds, and significant non-crown financial holdings would not pass into the direct administrative control of the incoming sovereign. Instead, they were to be irrevocably transferred into an independent, private foundation, controlled exclusively by a board of trustees selected by Queen Camilla's private office. Among the designated holdings were rights to revenue streams from private land holdings, long-held family heirlooms with vast historical value, and, most critically, perpetual operational funding allocations meant to sustain her private office and extended staff completely outside the authority of the sovereign grant. It was, in effect, a financial and structural partition of royal power. The implications of the clause were immediate and profound. If allowed to stand, the provision would effectively carve out a permanently funded, self-governing enclave within the royal ecosystem. It would allow an outgoing court to retain immense economic and institutional leverage, completely insulated from the oversight of the future king. William did not view this as a standard exercise in securing a queen consort's future comfort or widowhood provisions. Standard protocols for a former consort are well established, transparent, and subject to direct agreement with the Treasury. This was entirely different. This was a covert effort to lock in structural independence and financial autonomy long after the political power of the current reign had expired. The calculation behind the clause was simple. Once an asset transfer of this legal nature is finalized and placed into an independent trust, reversing it requires either a public legal battle or direct legislative action, both of which would inflict catastrophic reputational damage on the monarchy. The architects of the clause believed they had created a bulletproof strategy. They assumed William would be trapped by the optics, forced to accept the loss of authority rather than risk a public feud that would destabilize the crown. That calculation proved to be their ultimate mistake. When the dossier detailing the hidden asset clause was placed on William's desk, it served as the definitive turning point. Whatever lingering hesitation existed within his inner circle was completely erased. This was not a passive network seeking subtle influence. It was an active operation attempting to strip the future sovereign of his rightful administrative control over the institution's private leverage. The clause acted as the spark. It transformed what had been a cautious monitoring operation by Kensington Palace into a decisive, cold, and absolute tactical strike. William recognized that money and assets are the real lifeblood of institutional power. Without independent funding, parallel networks cannot pay private strategists, maintain off-the-record public relations teams, or command the loyalty of external advisors. By identifying the exact financial mechanism designed to keep this network alive, William was given the precise target he needed. There would be no negotiations over the clause. There would be no compromises or amended drafts. The discovery of the hidden asset clause provided William with total moral and institutional clarity. The structure had to be completely dismantled, its legal frameworks invalidated, and its presence within the royal family permanently erased. The cold execution of authority. When the British monarchy decides to strip power from one of its own, there is no public trial, no dramatic television address, and no tearful press conference. The institution operates with a quiet, lethal precision refined over 1,000 years. Once the decision is made, the machinery of state turns with absolute indifference to emotion. When Prince William received the full dossier detailing the hidden asset clause, he did not launch a war of public relations. He executed an operational shutdown. The campaign to dismantle Queen Camilla's shadow network was planned and executed in complete secrecy. It began not at Buckingham Palace or high-profile public engagements, but in the private offices of the Duchy of Cornwall, the administrative heart of the Prince of Wales's vast financial and territorial empire. The first phase of William's execution strategy was total isolation. Within 48 hours of confirming the covert asset transfers, William summoned his core executive strategy team to a private briefing at Kensington Palace. The mandate was unambiguous: cut off every administrative, legal, and financial conduit connected to Camilla's shadow court before her advisors even realized their operation had been compromised. An unauthorized influence network is like a tree. You do not fight it by trimming the branches. You sever the taproot, stop the flow of water, and let it wither in the quiet. William's legal advisors acted swiftly. Utilizing his statutory authority as the Prince of Wales and the supreme head of the Duchy of Cornwall, William issued a series of binding administrative directives. All draft property allocations, long-term lease renewals, and trust restructuring agreements connected to Queen Camilla's extended family and private associates were frozen immediately. External legal firms that had facilitated the off-the-record codicils were removed from the duchy's legal roster. Their security clearances were revoked, and their access to royal archives and estate documents was canceled without prior warning. Specialized accountants were ordered to conduct a line-by-line review of every operational expense line connected to Clarence House, ensuring that no state funds or revenue streams were being quietly funneled into third-party foundations. In a single afternoon, the financial framework meant to secure Camilla's long-term independence collapsed. With the financial machinery neutralized, William moved to clear the human element of the shadow court. In traditional court politics, power rests heavily on access. The subtle privilege of holding key administrative positions sits on key trusts and whispers into the sovereign's ear. William understood that as long as Camilla's network held official titles and board seats within royal patronages, they could rebuild their influence. Key advisors, media consultants, and long-serving private secretaries aligned with Camilla's private office began receiving formal invitations to standard executive reviews. During these meetings, they were quietly presented with pre-drafted resignation letters. The terms were non-negotiable: depart quietly with generous severance packages and strict non-disclosure agreements, or face comprehensive financial audits that would be made public. Dozens of administrative committees overseeing everything from royal art collections to private land management were restructured overnight. Seats previously occupied by Camilla's trusted confidants were eliminated or reassigned to William's closest allies. Grace and favor properties and office spaces within the royal footprint that had been quietly allocated to Camilla's informal network were systematically reclaimed under the guise of essential infrastructure optimization. The speed of the operation left Camilla's circle completely disoriented. They found themselves locked out of administrative channels, their emails unreturned by senior palace staff, who had clearly received new orders from the incoming king-in-waiting. The final stage of the execution was the physical and operational containment of Queen Camilla herself within the official hierarchy. William did not attempt to strip her of her ceremonial title as queen consort. Doing so would have triggered a constitutional crisis and damaged the crown's public image. Instead, he implemented what insiders described as the protocol barrier. Camilla's public schedule was systematically restructured. Her involvement in core state functions, high-level diplomatic briefings, and confidential policy discussions was steadily curtailed. While she continued to appear at major ceremonial events alongside King Charles, her administrative footprint within the household was reduced to zero. Her private office was brought under the strict oversight of the Sovereign Grants Central Accounting Committee, effectively preventing her from hiring external PR consultants, authorizing independent media leaks, or pursuing private initiatives outside the official line. When Camilla's chief strategist attempted to appeal these restrictions directly to King Charles, they discovered that the channels of communication had already been altered. All administrative appeals regarding household management, estate budgets, and senior appointments were now routed directly through the Prince of Wales's executive team. The execution of authority was so smooth that to the outside world, nothing had changed. The royal family continued to attend church services, host foreign dignitaries, and wave from the balcony of Buckingham Palace. But inside the palace corridors, the balance of power had experienced a permanent shift. Prince William had proven that he did not need to wait for his coronation to wield the ultimate authority of the monarchy. By systematically stripping away the shadow network, revoking unauthorized privileges, and locking down the financial levers of state, he sent an unmistakable message to every courtier, politician, and family member inside the House of Windsor. The crown does not negotiate. The future of the monarchy belongs to Prince William, and anyone attempting to build an empire in the shadows will be quietly, decisively, and permanently erased. The real reason. Revealed institutional self-preservation. To the average observer, a royal crisis is always framed as a human drama. The popular narrative prefers simple, emotional tropes, jealousies, ancient grudges, and personal rivalries passed down through generations. When stories began to circulate about Prince William taking control of the internal apparatus, the instinct of the outside world was to view it through the lens of family history. People assumed this was an act of personal revenge, a long-delayed defense of his late mother, or a simple clash of personalities between a future king and his stepmother. That interpretation was completely wrong. The cold truth that stunned those inside the palace walls was that Prince William's actions had nothing to do with personal feelings. The motivation behind the total dismantle of Queen Camilla's shadow network was rooted in a far more ruthless concept: pure institutional self-preservation. To understand why William acted with such absolute finality, one must understand the unique vulnerabilities of the modern British monarchy. The Crown is an ancient institution operating in a modern world that demands total transparency, fiscal restraint, and absolute single-mindedness of purpose. The survival of the monarchy relies entirely on the public's belief that the institution exists to serve the nation, not to enrich or empower a private circle of individuals. When William discovered the extent of the shadow operation, he did not see a personal insult. He saw a direct, systemic threat to the survival of the throne. For years, Queen Camilla's private office had been quietly cultivating a secondary locus of power. By securing independent legal agreements, placing trusted allies on critical committees, and establishing quiet financial pathways, her circle had built a parallel structure within the royal estate. To an outsider, this might have looked like harmless court politics or standard planning for a comfortable future. But to a future sovereign trained from birth to protect the authority of the crown, it was an existential security breach. Allowing a rival center of influence to establish itself inside the household creates a lethal structural flaw. It creates two distinct command structures, two competing press strategies, and two separate agendas pulling at the fabric of the institution. In the past, such divisions led to catastrophic public feuds, ruinous media leaks, and deep institutional instability. William recognized that if this parallel network was allowed to survive into his own reign, his authority as king would be permanently compromised before he even stepped onto the altar at Westminster Abbey. He would inherit an institution fractured from within, burdened by external obligations, and tied to financial commitments that he had never approved. The real shock for senior courtiers was not just that William took action, but the absolute, dispassionate logic behind how he did it. There was no raised voice, no dramatic confrontation, and no appeal to personal emotion. William viewed the shadow network not as a group of people, but as an unauthorized operational risk that needed to be systematically eliminated. The risk was threefold. First was the financial danger. In an era where public scrutiny of royal finances is at an all-time high, the existence of an off-the-books network diverting private assets and long-term revenue streams would have been politically catastrophic if exposed by the press or parliament. A single investigative report detailing secret trust agreements designed to enrich an outgoing court circle could bring down the entire financial architecture of the sovereign grant. Second was the narrative danger. A second center of power meant a second source of media leaks. For decades, the monarchy suffered immensely from different royal factions using friendly journalists to fight internal battles. William was determined to end the era of factional media warfare once and for all. By severing the shadow network's connections to external public relations consultants and press figures, he ensured that the monarchy would speak with only one unified, controlled voice. Third, and most importantly, was the constitutional danger. Power in a constitutional monarchy must flow from one single point: the sovereign and the immediate line of succession. The moment a non-regnant spouse or an outgoing court establishes a permanent, self-sustaining structure, the authority of the throne becomes diluted. It creates a dangerous precedent where passing figures can carve out pieces of the crown's power for their own long-term use. William's intervention was a masterclass in institutional surgery. He did not merely stop the current plan, he altered the internal policies so thoroughly that no such attempt could ever be made again. He proved that when the survival of the crown is at stake, individual feelings, family relationships, and personal loyalties are entirely secondary. The courtiers who had spent years quietly building Camilla's network had completely miscalculated the young prince. They believed that his modern, approachable public image reflected a soft approach to internal management. They assumed he would avoid a heavy-handed confrontation out of fear of public scandal. They failed to realize that beneath the polished, contemporary exterior is a man deeply committed to the uncompromising, thousand-year-old rules of monarchical survival. When the dust settled and the shadow operation had been completely stripped of its authority, the broader household understood the true lesson of what had occurred. Prince William had demonstrated that he views the monarchy not as a family business, but as a sacred trust that he is bound to defend at all costs. Anyone who threatens the integrity, security, or future authority of that trust will be removed, swiftly and without hesitation. The real reason for the purge was not anger, hatred, or revenge. It was the cold, unyielding necessity of preserving the supreme authority of the British crown, Charles's silent concession. For a reigning king, there is no burden heavier than realizing that the machinery of state no longer bends entirely to his personal will. Throughout his life, King Charles had fought relentlessly to secure Queen Camilla's place at his side within the institution and in the eyes of the British public. He spent decades overcoming public hostility, internal court resistance, and constitutional hurdles to ensure she would one day be crowned Queen Consort. Yet, when Prince William presented the undeniable evidence of the shadow network, the king was confronted with the ultimate reality of absolute monarchy. Power does not belong to the individual wearing the crown today. It belongs to the continuity of the institution tomorrow. The confrontation between father and son was not characterized by theatrical displays of anger. It occurred in absolute privacy, far removed from the sight of palace courtiers, personal secretaries, and domestic staff. The king, navigating the immense pressures of his reign alongside his personal health management, found himself forced into a corner by the cold, uncompromising logic of his heir. Prince William did not ask his father for permission to restructure the internal apparatus. He did not present a request that could be debated, delayed, or softened by palace committees. Instead, he laid out a complete operational framework detailing how the private network had operated, where money had been redirected, and the catastrophic damage it posed to the future of the monarchy. The strategic genius of William's move was that he did not force his father to choose between his wife and his son. He forced the king to choose between a temporary private arrangement and the long-term survival of the crown itself. For Charles, the choice was devastating, but it was inevitable. As sovereign, Charles understood better than anyone the sacred duty of preserving the monarchy. He knew that if he attempted to shield Camilla's private court, he would trigger an internal war with the Prince of Wales that could not remain hidden. A public conflict between the current king and the future king would permanently shatter the carefully built narrative of royal stability, destroying the public trust he had spent his entire life trying to build. Furthermore, William held absolute financial leverage. As the master of the Duchy of Cornwall, William controlled the vast financial empire that generates the independent revenue needed to sustain royal operations. By systematically locking down those accounts and revoking the legal structures tied to the hidden provisions, William had already executed the financial shutdown before the briefing even took place. The king was left with a stark reality. The financial and operational levers had already been pulled. To reverse them would require an open, public countermand that would expose the fundamental fracture inside the royal household. Charles made the ultimate silent concession. He chose the crown. The agreement reached between the king and the Prince of Wales was a masterclass in institutional compromise. Publicly, everything would remain completely seamless. The king and queen consort would continue to present a united front at state banquets, international summits, and major public ceremonies. Camilla would retain her formal title, her public patronages, and the outward prestige of her office. But behind the formal portraits, the concession was total. The king agreed to step aside completely regarding the administrative and financial management of the future reign. He permitted William's executive team to quietly dismantle the shadow network, terminate external legal contracts, and revoke the unauthorized access privileges granted to Camilla's private circle. Camilla's closest advisors were quietly phased out of official meetings, their influence neutralized without a single public statement. Whenever Camilla's private office attempted to raise objections, they were met with a firm, unified front from both Kensington Palace and Buckingham Palace. The king would not intervene. For Queen Camilla, the realization of this silent concession was a profound institutional defeat. She had spent decades building a secure position within the family, only to realize that her influence was tied entirely to a time-limited reign. The moment her network attempted to push beyond its boundaries, the incoming sovereign shut down the entire operation with cold efficiency, and her husband, the king, was powerless to stop it. Inside the palace, the shift in tone was immediate. Courtiers who had previously tried to navigate between the two camps quickly recognized where true authority now resided. The king's silence was viewed not as weakness, but as a deliberate surrender to the inevitable reality of succession. Charles recognized that his legacy as king would not be defined by protecting the private ambitions of his court, but by ensuring a smooth, secure transfer of untainted authority to his heir. By conceding to William's decisive operational purge, the king preserved the dignity of his own reign while quietly validating his son's readiness to govern with an iron hand. The silent concession proved that when the survival of the British monarchy is threatened from within, even a king must submit to the uncompromising demands of the crown's future. What comes after? Camilla. The monarchy. William is now building. The true test of any political or institutional purge lies not in the immediate chaos of its execution, but in the permanent reality that replaces it. Once the legal frameworks were rewritten, the shadow network disbanded, and the financial conduit sealed, the modern British monarchy entered a radically restructured era. The immediate result was an atmosphere of quiet, absolute control. Queen Camilla remained queen consort in the eyes of the public, fulfilling her duties alongside King Charles with disciplined professionalism. The cameras continued to flash, the carriage processions proceeded along the mall, and the global media covered every state visit with standard admiration. Yet, within the working corridors of the royal estate, the reality was stark. Camilla's position had been permanently recalibrated. She became a ceremonial figure in the purest sense of the word, visible, respected, and entirely detached from the underlying power machinery of state. The private advisors who had once whispered in her ear were gone. The external public relations firms that had quietly managed her independent profile were no longer under contract. The draft trust agreements that sought to secure independent wealth and perpetual operational influence for her private court were reduced to shredded paper in legal offices across London. For the courtiers and administrative staff who remained, the message was unmistakable. The era of courtly compromise, off-the-record factional briefing, and shadow influence was officially over. Power within the House of Windsor had been consolidated into a single unified command structure, controlled entirely from Kensington Palace. Prince William had not merely protected his future reign, he had set a definitive precedent for how the British monarchy will govern itself in the 21st century. This ruthless restructuring served as the blueprint for the upcoming era. For years, political commentators and royal experts speculated on how William would approach his eventual time on the throne. Many assumed his modern, relaxed public image indicated an informal, flexible approach to head of state responsibilities. They believed he would oversee a relaxed, softened institution that tolerated internal variations and personal agendas. The neutralization of the shadow court completely demolished that assumption. Through his decisive actions, William revealed the true nature of his leadership style. Beneath the open-collar shirts, the charitable focus on homelessness and environmentalism, and the warm public interactions lies an executive operator who views the monarchy through a lens of unyielding institutional realism. William understands that the modern world presents unprecedented threats to the survival of the crown. In an era of intense financial scrutiny, rapid digital information flows, and declining institutional loyalty across global politics, a constitutional monarchy cannot afford internal divisions, private enclaves, or unauthorized financial arrangements. To survive the decades ahead, the crown must be streamlined, transparent, and completely free from secondary interests. It must act with absolute single-mindedness, ensuring that every asset, every financial decision, and every public statement directly serves the legitimacy of the sovereign. By eliminating Camilla's network before ascending the throne, William ensured that when his coronation arrives, he will step into an institution completely free of institutional debt, legacy factionalism, or competing courts. He cleared the board entirely, leaving himself and the Princess of Wales with absolute authority to shape the monarchy for a new century. The dynamic between Prince William and Princess Catherine also solidified during this period. Together, they established a unified executive partnership that stands in sharp contrast to the fragmented court structures of previous generations. There are no competing strategy teams within their office, no separate media agendas, and no divergent financial priorities. They operate as a singular, disciplined center of power, prioritizing the long-term stability of the line of succession above all else. The courtiers who survived the transition came to view William not as an impulsive reformer, but as a master strategist. He had managed to eliminate a deeply entrenched shadow network, strip an outgoing court of its administrative leverage, and force a reigning king into a silent concession, all without creating a single public scandal or dropping a tear in the public eye. It was a masterclass in modern statecraft, executed with the cold efficiency of an ancient dynasty and the slick precision of a corporate takeover. When the public looks at the British royal family, they see a timeless tradition. They see grand cathedrals, golden carriages, velvet robes, and family members standing together on the balcony of Buckingham Palace. It is an image designed to project permanence, family unity, and steady historical continuity. However, behind that golden facade lies an uncompromising truth that has governed the British crown for over 1,000 years. The crown is not a family business, nor is it a cooperative venture meant to accommodate the private ambitions, long-term comforts, or extended networks of those who marry into its ranks. It is an instrument of sovereign authority, operating on cold, strategic principles that demand total submission from everyone within its orbit. The story of Queen Camilla's quiet removal from the true machinery of state is not a story of personal hatred, emotional vengeance, or old family grudges. To view it through that dramatic lens is to completely misunderstand how power operates at the highest level of the state. Prince William's purge of the Shadow Court was an act of pure, calculated institutional self-preservation. When he discovered a hidden legal and financial mechanism designed to carve out an independent enclave of power for an outgoing court, he did not hesitate, negotiate, or compromise. He acted with absolute, ruthless finality to safeguard the undivided authority of the throne. In doing so, he delivered a profound shock to those who believed the modern monarchy had become soft, modern, or overly reliant on public opinion. He proved that when the long-term future of the throne is threatened, the Windsor machinery will turn with the same cold, unyielding precision that it has displayed for centuries. Queen Camilla retains her crown, her title, and her place on the balcony beside the king. She will continue to be received with official honors and covered by the world's media as a dutiful queen consort. Yet, stripped of her network, cut off from independent financial pipelines, and permanently isolated from administrative influence, she stands as a powerful reminder of an eternal monarchical law. Titles are granted by the state, but power belongs exclusively to those who command the future of the crown. As the British monarchy steps toward an uncompromising horizon, Prince William has made his position crystal clear to the world. He does not intend to merely inherit a crown. He intends to govern an unassailable institution. Anyone who attempts to build an empire in the shadows of his future reign will be quietly, systematically, and permanently erased. Was William right to make the most dramatic decision in a generation, or has he permanently altered the monarchy in ways that cannot be undone? The royal family will never be the same.